Under the harsh sun of Dustwell, folks talked too much and worked too little. They said Clara Whitmore's husband had gone mad, that he'd wandered into the desert chasing a fortune that didn't exist. When his horse came back without him, the town moved on, and laughed when Clara swore she'd find him herself. That was 3 years ago. Now, the widow Whitmore still lived on the edge of town, mending fences, breaking horses, and refusing to sell her land. Every Saturday, when she came into town for supplies, the saloon men would tip their hats with mocking smiles, whispering behind her back. The sheriff called her stubborn. The banker called her foolish. But that morning, as she hitched her wagon outside the general store, a stranger rode in from the south. He wasn't dusty like the others. He carried himself with the kind of calm that made men look twice. A cowboy with a scar across his jaw and a voice that rumbled low when he asked, "Where can a man find the Whitmore ranch?" The storekeeper froze midward, staring at the badge tucked in the cowboy's vest. Old, worn, but real. "Depends who's a skin," he muttered. "A friend," the cowboy said, though his eyes held something harder. Clara stepped out of the store right then, arms full of grain sacks. When she saw him, the bags fell to the ground. Her face went pale. The air between them thickened with memories that refused to die. The cowboy tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Clara." For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. The town went silent around them, eyes glued to the ghost who'd just ridden back from the desert. "Ethan," she whispered, "you were supposed to be dead." He smiled faintly. "So were a lot of us." The sheriff burst out of his office, hand on his revolver. "Whitmore, you got a lot of explaining to do." Ethan's hand hovered near his belt, calm as stone. "You'll get your answers, Sheriff. But first, I need to see the ranch." Clara's heart pounded as she looked at the man she'd mourned, the man who now stood alive and dangerous. Dust swirled around their boots. The town watched in stunned silence as she finally spoke, voice trembling with disbelief. "Ethan, what did you bring back from that desert?" He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Something this town ain't ready for." The wind howled across the plains as Ethan rode beside Clara toward the ranch, their wagon creaking under the weight of silence. She couldn't stop glancing at him, half in awe, half in fear. His face was the same, but his eyes weren't. They had a distance in them, a kind of wild emptiness born from places men weren't meant to survive. "You really think I'd just vanish?" he asked quietly. "You vanished for 3 years, she snapped. "Left me to bury an empty coffin." He gave a small, haunted laugh. "It wasn't by choice." When they reached the ranch, the horses balked near the gate. Clara frowned. The air smelled strange, metallic, heavy, like a storm without clouds. "They've been spooked like that all week," she said. Ethan dismounted, crouched near the corral, and pressed his hand to the dirt. "You didn't feel it?" "The ground's been trembling." "You mean earthquakes?" "No," he murmured. "Not that." Inside the barn, tools rattled on their hooks. Chickens scattered for no reason. The whole place felt wrong. Clara folded her arms, watching him pace like a man hunting something invisible. "You came back with stories, didn't you? You always did." He stopped, eyes locked on her. "Not stories, Clara. Proof." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small metal sphere, smooth, dark, pulsing faintly with blue light. "Found it buried under the dunes. Wasn't made by any miner." She stepped back instinctively. "What is that?" "Something old. Something powerful. Men died trying to protect it." He placed it on the table, and it gave off a soft hum that made the lantern flicker. "Ethan," she whispered, "what did you do?" He didn't answer. Outside, thunder cracked though the sky was clear. The horses screamed, and the ground shook harder. Ethan grabbed the sphere and shoved it into his coat. "They found me," he said sharply. "Who?" she demanded. He looked toward the horizon, where dark shapes began to appear through the dust. "Not who, Clara. What?" By sundown, the shapes turned into riders. 5 of them, faces hidden, their horses painted black. The townsfolk saw them approach and barred their doors. Inside the Whitmore ranch, Clara loaded her late husband's rifle with shaking hands. "You're telling me those men chased you across the desert for that thing?" "They ain't men," Ethan said, watching from the window. "They wear the faces of men, but they ain't." "You've been out there too long," she muttered, but her voice wavered. One of the riders raised his hand, and the others stopped in perfect unison. The air outside went still, the kind of silence that makes the hair rise on your arms. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, gun drawn. "You want it, you'll have to come through me." The lead rider dismounted with eerie grace, his boots barely making a sound. "You can't keep what doesn't belong to you, cowboy," he said, his voice flat, mechanical. Clara froze. There was a faint glow under his collar, blue, the same color as the sphere. "Ethan, what are they?" she whispered. "Machines," he said grimly. "Old ones. I found where they were buried. Now they want it back." The rider raised his gun, and lightning arced from the barrel. Ethan dove for cover as the porch exploded behind him. Clara fired from the doorway, hitting one square in the chest, but instead of blood, sparks flew. "You brought this curse home," she cried. Ethan rolled to his feet, firing again. "I brought a chance to end it." The sky darkened, the hum from the sphere growing louder. One of the riders grabbed Ethan, slamming him into the dirt. The others closed in, their metallic eyes reflecting firelight. Then, with a scream of metal, the ground split open near the barn. A blinding blue light shot upward, scattering the riders like leaves. Clara stumbled back, shielding her eyes. When the light faded, Ethan was gone. The machines, too. Only the cracked earth remained, glowing faintly. She collapsed to her knees, whispering his name into the wind. But the only answer was the distant thunder, rolling closer. The town buried what was left of the barn a week later, pretending none of it had happened. Folks whispered that the widow had finally lost her mind, talking about machines and lights in the ground. The sheriff filed his report and told her to rest, but Clara stayed on the porch each night, staring at the horizon. Then, one evening, the horses started pacing again. A low hum filled the air. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside just as the blue light returned, but this time, softer, steadier. From the light stepped Ethan, covered in dust, his coat torn, the metal sphere clutched in his hand. He looked different again, older, calmer. "You came back," she breathed. He nodded. "And I brought them with me." Behind him, figures emerged, not the machines, but people. Miners, farmers, women and children, faces she recognized. They were trapped down there, Clara. The machines took them long ago. The sphere freed them. Tears filled her eyes as one of the men stumbled forward, Sheriff Alden, his badge tarnished, his skin pale but alive. "We thought you were dead," she said. "We were," Ethan replied quietly. "Until this thing gave us a choice." He set the sphere on the porch. It pulsed once, then dimmed. "What choice?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "To stay or to go back." As the wind swept through the ranch, the freed souls began to fade, their forms dissolving into light. Clara reached for Ethan's hand, terrified to lose him again. "Don't," she whispered. "Not again." He squeezed her fingers gently. "You'll be all right now. The land's safe. The town will remember." His hand slipped away as his body turned to light, the sphere glowing one last time before going dark forever. When morning came, the ranch stood quiet, bathed in gold. The town no longer laughed at the widow, because every dawn, when the wind blew across Dustwell, folks swore they heard a cowboy's voice on the breeze, saying, "Told you I'd come back."